Hey everyone, welcome back to Freedom Malts. We're going to see if we can do something a little bit more fun here today. We're going to look at 5 American single malts that I think represent the category extremely well. American single malt as a category is this excellent bridge between American whiskey and single malt whiskey. And there is benefits from each individual category blended together to make where American single malt is. If you're a bourbon lover, you can find some familiarity in American single malts with certain ones. If you're a single malt lover, you can find similarities and familiarity with other American single malts. The 5 that I selected here for this are going to be fairly readily available. All of them offer shipping to quite a few states, 41, 42, somewhere in that range. They're all priced roughly around the $60 mark. Let's get into the list. First up, we're going to look at Keegan Santa Fe Spirits. It's out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Unique thing about Keegan is instead of using peat to smoke the barley, they're using mesquite to smoke the barley. The mesquite is adding this wonderfully balanced flavor as opposed to some kind of crazy smoke. With the mesquite, there is not that medicinal Band-Aid, iodine, earthiness that is off-putting to a lot of people about peated single malts. Their malt is wonderfully vibrant and fruity. It's creamy. It's a fantastic whiskey. They've been around since about 2010. They offer this particular expression, which is their flagship mesquite smoked single malt. They offer a cask strength version of this as well. They offer a version of this that is then aged further in a apple brandy barrel. And then they also offer an unsmoked version, which I would be very interested to get just to kind of see what the naked malt without the smoke is like. A couple other unique things that they do various sizes of barrels for maturation. They are using mostly used oak, so it's going to be a little bit more reminiscent of Scottish style whiskey, Scottish style single malts, as opposed to the American side of things. But there is still some of those familiar barrel tannins and barrel notes that you get from American whiskey in here. The other thing that they do is a climate controlled warehouse. Now it's not a completely uncommon, but it's not the norm. Like I said, all of these are around $60. So this one is coming in right at $50, $58, $62, depending on where you are. It should be pretty readily available in most markets. I particularly found this one in the Chicagoland market, but I know you can order it off their website. In fact, you can order all of them off their website as long as they're available. And it definitely one to try if you're interested in trying American single malts. This is a great representation of the category. Okay, next up on the list, we're looking at Strand of Hands out of Denver, Colorado. Strand of Hands has been around since 2004. They are a long-time player in the American single malt scene, leaning more towards the American whiskey side of things. The familiarity for bourbon lovers is going to be there. They mature everything in new charred oak at a number 3 char. So that barrel impact is going to be there, and you are going to recognize that almost immediately. Their malt is very nice. It actually is pretty reminiscent of a nice Highland malt for me. So you get kind of like the best of both worlds there. You get that really nice malt flavor with the addition of that new charred oak barrel impact. We're going to look at the yellow label, standard yellow label. This is their 4 to 7 year old stuff. They do offer several different versions, expressions, if you will. Nice synthetic cork, which is a real bonus. They do have their Blue Peak, which is a Solaris system. The sherry cask the Diamond Peak, which is their black label. And you can also get single barrel, store pick, cast strength versions of the yellow label. They are pretty readily available at almost every store I've been to. I've at least seen the yellow label somewhere. The blue label is also pretty readily available. A great representation of American single malt. One of the, being opened in 2004, one of the, getting close to one of the original few that were making American single malts, and kind of got this ball rolling for us. So if you see one, you're interested in trying an American single malt, this is definitely one not to pass up. All right, next up on the list. Now, this list is not in any order as my favorites or least favorites or anything like that. It is just a list of 5 American single malts that I think represent the category extremely well. That being said, this next one on the list is probably, I would say it's at least in my top 3 of favorite American single malts. It is fantastically easy to drink. It's also complex and nuanced. One of those whiskeys where you could sit down with a glass and not think about it at all and just enjoy it. Or you could sit down with the glass and really pick it apart. This one is the Cedar Ridge, the Quintessential. Fantastic name for this whiskey. Obviously, the quintessential meaning the most perfect or typical representation of something. Also, the owner's last name is Quint. Very unique process in production on here on this whiskey. Basically, they make like 2 different whiskeys. 100% peated malt whiskey that's aged for 4 to 5 years in ex-whiskey barrels. They also make a 100% unpeated whiskey that's aged in ex-whiskey barrels for 2 to 3 years. And then after that 2 to 3 years goes into various finishing barrels. Once the maturation processes are done on both of those 2 different whiskeys, they get married into a large Solera tun, and then they bottle from that Solera tun. Now that ton never gets below about 50% or so. They bottle it. When it gets to about 50%, they refill it back up with stuff waiting in the wings to go into it. Definitely a quintessential representation of American single malt as a category. Wonderfully malty. Like I said, super easy to drink. Right around the $60 mark. This one I did have to order online. However, since then, I have seen it pop up locally in stores, several places. So it is becoming quite a bit more readily available. Distribution's getting a lot better. To be able to find this one should be getting relatively easy. If you see this one out there and you're only going to try one off of this list, definitely make it this one. This one is a fantastic, fantastic whiskey and a fantastic American single malt. Next up on the list, and really, in all actuality, you can't talk about American single malts without talking about these guys, Westland. They are pretty much at the forefront of the American single malt movement, if you will. They have been around since 2010. They have recently gone through a little bit of a lineup change. It used to be the Heritage Series, which was an American oak, sherry wood, the peated, which by the name, it is a peated American single malt. Their lineup change is they've kind of gotten rid of these 3 and turned it into one flagship American single malt. So this is, for lack of a better description, basically a combination of all 3. There's 5 different malts that go into making this whiskey. The balance on this thing is fantastic. Another little unique feature that is nice but not nice at the same time, they use a screw cap. It seals really well. You don't have to worry about a cork breaking or deteriorating. That's kind of nice, but it does sometimes get a little tight on there. The color on this stuff is just wonderful. Maturation in new oak. It's got maturation in ex-bourbon barrels. It's got maturation in ex-sherry barrels, and all blended together to make one singular whiskey. and it does a wonderful job of kind of like bringing all that stuff together. Westland is also a very shining star in the terroir department, which means basically showcasing their local area through the product. Their special editions are what's going to showcase that the most. Starting with Calere, this is the first edition of Calere. This project is pretty much to showcase unique or special strains of barley. Next, it's the Gariana, is their project on wood, basically. They're using local Gariana oak, coopered into barrels, and using that to age the whiskey in. There is a third special edition, which is not actually out yet. It is called the Solum, and that is going to be a peated project. The peat is actually coming from a bog in the Pacific Northwest. So it's going to be local peat, local wood, local barley. Westland, like I said, has been around since about 2010. They are definitely at the forefront of American single malt, and they're producing great stuff. If you haven't tried one and American single malt is something that you want to try, they are definitely a front runner in the triad category. Fifth one on the list here, you also cannot talk about American single malt if you don't talk about Balcones. Balcones coming in at about 2007 on the market. Texas whiskey, big, bold flavors coming out of Texas. Definitely the case here too. They have many expressions. If I had to pick what like a core range of theirs would be, it would be first and foremost the Texas One, Mirador, the Lineage. This is going to be like their entry level, so to speak. Priced wise, it's going to be around the $40 mark. Sometimes less. I've seen it for as low as $33 on the shelf, which is, I mean, it's unbeatable at $33. It's pretty close to unbeatable at $40, but at $33, it's a real winner. We have some new aged American single malt processes and some old school Scottish single malt processes kind of being blended together into one cohesive whiskey here. They use about 80% used oak in the blends of Lineage, and the other is going to be just like their Texas One, new oak, Texas malt. It ends up being a really, really well-balanced, nice bit of barrel impact, nice bit of malt, and just one of the shining stars out of this distillery, in my opinion. They also have, or used to have, now I'm not sure, there has been a slight change in some of the business operations at Balcones as of recently. If you pay any attention to whiskey news, they were bought out by a very large corporation that has and owns many whiskey distilleries. We're not going to go into that now because that is a whole separate topic. However, they did have a wonderful barrel select, store select program. You can get some super fantastic whiskeys out of that program. And Balcones is definitely on the forefront of American single malt. They have a lot of different expressions to meet a lot of different palates, and I'm almost certain you can find something out of their lineup that is enjoyable for you. All right, what's a good list without a couple runners up or honorable mentions, right? Andalusia is going to be the specific brand that has an honorable mention. In my opinion, this is the best whiskey coming out of Texas, hands down, across any category. The guys over at Revenant or at Andalusia, overly friendly, overly in love with whiskey. They're making whiskey on a small scale, and they are turning out some of the best stuff I've ever had. This particular one is the Revenant Oak. They do have a core range. It's 3 different ones. We got triple distilled, which I am currently out of. Revenant Oak, which is going to be a peated single malt whiskey. And then they have Striker, which is, instead of peat smoke, they use various woods that you would use for smoking like barbecue with. All three of them are absolutely fantastic. I mean, the triple distilled is like liquid candy. The Revenant Oak is a wonderful malt whiskey, malt forward, with just the right amount of peat smoke in it to make it interesting, but not enough to make it off-putting for people that are not into peated whiskey. And the Striker is just a super unique take on doing something out of the normal. That's the thing about American single malt. It's not being created to replicate anything. They're trying to put their own stamp on something that's been around and been made for many, many years. And doing stuff like smoking it with various woods, or making multiple different whiskeys into one bottle. That's the kind of stuff that is just unique about it. So if you're in Texas or in a state that Andalusia can ship to, I definitely recommend picking one of these up. You won't regret it. And for the next honorable mention, this particular one happens to be Hatch Distilling out of Door County, Wisconsin. Now, if you know who I am, you know I'm a Wisconsinite cheesehead. So this is a local distillery to me. The reason I bring this up is get out to your local distilleries. Get out to those small guys. See if they're doing American single malts. Ask them about it. Maybe they made one a year ago and it's sitting in the rick house or in the barrel storage, just waiting to be ready yet. And when you talk to these guys, the owners and the distillers that are making the stuff at these small distilleries, they are overly joyed usually to find somebody that's way into whiskey and want to know, hey, what do you got coming up? What are your thoughts on this? And what are your thoughts on that? They love that stuff if they have the time. Sometimes those distilleries get really busy, aside from making the products, which is busy in itself. They're also running a tasting room, and that's where they generate their revenue from. So, I mean, they're busy people. So if you can get in there, like a half an hour before they close, when the customer base is kind of toned down a little bit, or maybe in their off season, like Wisconsin here, we have a tourist season and an off season. Right now is the off season, the middle of winter. So this is a good time to get out and talk to those distilleries and owners and see what their thoughts are on some of this stuff. So I thank you guys for watching. I can't cheers an empty glass, so let's put some in here. And cheers to this American spirit.